The difference in progression between someone who manages their resources properly and someone who doesn't is night and day, and how easily they can handle things. Across the many account reviews that I've done live on stream, I can safely say most people mismanage their resources. So let's dive into this. Gems are the most obvious resource that needs to be managed properly, as they're used for pools, refreshes in the outpost, refresh in the shop, assignments, and they can substitute for tickets both on the wishlist pool and on the rate-up pool. They also allow you to unlock extra slots, which is one of the key things that you can use them for in terms of proper management. The recommended amount of slots for a free-to-play optimized competitive player is in the ballpark of 31 to 33 slots. How would I know that as a spender? Well, I spoke with some of the strongest players that are free-to-play, such as Yanni_GD, who is a 100% free-to-play deep hard pusher. Go check out his channel. His videos are a treat to watch in terms of clears. And he says 31 to 33 is really around the amount you want to have so that you don't overspend your gems and also have access to enough Nikkes to be able to clear content consistently. For synchro slots, do keep in mind that the Tactics Academy will give you a bunch of them, so don't buy them immediately. Just unlock a few if absolutely needed, but for the most part, wait for Tactics Academy to kick in. Level up your Tactics Academy, use all of the free slots first, and then if absolutely needed, you will be able to just get a couple of extra ones using gems. But Yanni, for example, has a lot of blank slots because he bought those slots way back using a few gems just for his free-to-play playing spendings because, you know, it was necessary at the time. We didn't have the Tactics Academy expansion, but nowadays we have the Tactics Academy slot expansion, so you don't need to probably even buy slots in the first place. So I talked about refreshes. Now keep in mind this is more geared towards either light spenders. Even free-to-plays could theoretically do it, but it is mostly recommended for light spenders all the way to whales, and that is refreshing the different things that can be refreshed, such as the shop, the assignments, and the outpost. I personally wouldn't recommend refreshing the shop unless you're a massive whale, because the things that you will roll will also oftentimes cost you gems. Now, the outpost daily 50 gem refresh is a nice little thing for light spenders to get extra resources, but the place where I would recommend the most rerolling if you're a light to heavy spender would be the assignments. In the assignments, you can reroll to get additional core dust, which is a very valuable resource, and you can also refresh to get more dull materials, which are incredibly powerful things that have been added recently to the gearing process in Nikke. I will also add that while refreshing the assignments, you could get lucky and get some extra gems into it, not to gain gems in total, but rather to mitigate the cost of rerolling for additional resources so that you smooth out your progression curve. I heard you like gambling within your gambling, so there is your gacha within a gacha. The next thing that I'm going to talk about are tickets. There are three types of what I would call tickets. The ones that I named the rainbow, which are used for only rate-up banners such as new Nikkes, and those banners have every single SSR in the game except seasonal Nikkes, meaning the Christmas Nikkes or the summer Nikkes, such as the recent Summer Sakura and Summer Rosanna, and collab Nikkes such as the recent Evangelion collab Nikkes. Those are not part of that rate-up. However, every other Nikke in the game is available in those, and you will use them to acquire essentially the latest Nikkes that have been released. The second type of ticket are the blue tickets. I nicknamed them the wishlist banner because in that banner you can choose Nikkes from every manufacturer that have been added to the general pool to choose which ones you would want to get. It is incredibly powerful, especially for newer players, because you can pre-plan how to break your 160 wall depending on what you're obtaining. That way, you will be able to not spend a singular day at the 160 wall, depending on your luck. Now, these banners contain also the pilgrims, but you cannot wishlist pilgrims at all, meaning that they will randomly just spook you within this wishlist as well. The last type of ticket, in heavy quotation marks, are the friendship points. The very reason why you will need to purge occasionally your friends list to not lose out of them. The Friendship Gacha essentially has every SSR in the game except the seasonal limited Nikkes, just like the previous ones, and also does not have pilgrims. This is very important distinction because it means that you can get incredibly powerful Nikkes such as Alice, Maxwell, and the like, but not the pilgrims. I will need to add as well that friend points, you gain 2 per friend and you get a maximum of 30 per day, meaning that you need to have at a bare minimum 15 very active friends to guarantee the maximum amount of friend points that you will be able to get in order to be able to roll for additional Nikkes essentially for free. I should also mention the mileage while we're here. So the gold mileage comes from rolling on the Rate Up Gacha, and it's your pity. You can choose to exercise it on any Rate Up banner at any point in time, so you don't have to worry about them disappearing and not being able to use them. Meaning that, for example, if you're rolling currently in the Evangelion collab and you got all of your Nikkes, well, you don't need to roll any further and you keep that gold mileage that will slowly accumulate across banners, and you will be able to use 200 on those, meaning that whenever you have pulled 200 times, you'll be able to exercise them and get whatever the current Rate Up Nikke is. It is very important to note that the priority list for that is usually pilgrims, because pilgrims have half the probability on their Rate Up banners compared to regular Nikkes, and the other place you could use them are on collab and seasonal Nikkes. Essentially, the seasonal Nikkes will only come once a year, and the collab Nikkes, such as the Evangelion, we don't know when they're going to come back. So it is worthwhile to consider using that gold mileage in those very limited ones, or in those very much lower probability but very powerful Nikkes that are the pilgrims. The silver mileage, you will obtain it from rolling on the blue ticket gacha, which is the wishlist one. This one will allow you to gain body labels, which is very different. Body labels are not the whole Nikke. They allow you to limit break whatever the Nikke is that you're buying the body label for, and there is a limited selection that rotates in the shop. I'll put an image on the screen for that. Meaning that it's a very powerful tool for breaking the 160 wall and for enhancing some specific Nikkes. For example, in my case, I use some of that silver mileage to get my max wall as high as possible because she's a very powerful. Now here comes one of the most horrendously mismanaged parts of the resources, which are the boxes. So, boxes, first and foremost, come in 2 types. There is the fixed resource type, where there is absolutely no value in hoarding them. You can just open them because they will give you the exact same amount of resources no matter at which point in time you open them. And then there's the scaling ones. Those ones, the ones that have 1H, 2H, and 24H, for example, scale based on hours of your outpost resource production. As a result, you should never open them as soon as you get them. You should only open them when absolutely necessary, especially core dust, which is a very, very limited resource that you cannot farm freely, and when you reach certain breakpoints. So, the breakpoints, I will put an image on screen to give an idea. For example, when it comes to core dust, is when you hit certain amount of campaign clear, both normal and hard mode, you will level up and gain additional core dust. All the other resources kind of scale as well, but it's mostly a matter of don't open your core dust crates unless you're at a breakpoint and you're very far away, or you're at a very strong wall. You can have a rough idea of what is clearable or how clearable it is by looking at the stage description. That way you can have a ballpark estimate of, is it worthwhile to open my resources now, or should I wait for later? For example, some of my friends are currently stuck on a boss called Mirror Container in hard mode, and that boss is only beatable at sync level 501 and above, which means that they very much have an incentive to open their boxes because they cannot gain resources anywhere else anyways. However, in my case, who am not really that far into the hard campaign, because that's the final chapter of hard campaign, I very much have an incentive to not open them and wait to reach certain points where I know that I will have to open them to be able to do decent clears in that sense. By saving these resources, you will be able to snowball them further and further, and by only opening them whenever you're truly stuck, you will be able to maximize the gain of that hourly dependent on your outpost resource creation. Now, this is not all that important if you don't care about min-maxing, but you know, this is a video about min-maxing resources, so what do you want from me? So let's talk gear, and gear, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. One of the, if not actually the most mismanaged part of the game in terms of resources and how to handle it. Gear comes in multiple levels, going from the gray gear all the way to tier 9 manufacturer gear that you can then convert into overload gear. Now, if you're interested in overload gear specifically, how it works and what to aim for, you can watch my overload guide gear from the Zero to Hero series that this is a part of, that I will just put up there somewhere. Now, gear is very important because it will make or break essentially every aspect of the game that you're trying to clear, be it PvP, PvE, solo raid, campaign push, anything. For obvious reasons, there is a lot of stat gaming involved, and what you need to understand is that when you get tier 9 manufacturer gear and then you use the custom modules called Rockas or Rocks by the community, you will attain overload lines. Now, the overload lines are one of the aspects, along with overloading specific Nikkes, that are the most mismanaged. You want to overload in the highest priority your core DPS Nikkes. The reason for that is very simple. How much investment are you putting versus how much return are you getting? Nikke at its core is a DPS race type of game because every stage is a time trial essentially. So the more damage you do, the faster you will clear it, and you will not time out. Now, when it comes to managing rocks and the like, I would say focus first on the core group that you will use for campaign pushing that will allow you to farm more resources. Once that core group has its core DPSs leveled up with their gear and overloads to a okay level, you can start making your second and third team, especially for things like Union Raid. Once you have those, you will be able to expand upon it. I talk about this in my overload guide, so I will not go more in depth. What I will go into though is the rerolling strategy. Once you have the Nikkes that you want to improve, the rerolling strategy in my case is quite simple. If it's a primary line, such as for example Nikkes that want attack or elemental, I would call those primary lines, and secondary lines I would call substats that are a little bit less important, like crit rate, crit damage, and the like. So if it's a primary line that is blue or black, I would usually lock it, because those are quite rare. Now, if it's a tier 11 or tier 10 and above, on the second line or on the third line, I would lock those as well, especially now that we have access to temporary locks. Make absolute use of them instead of your own rocks. I would lock them and reroll to try to gain stats on the first line or on the second line if it's on the final line that you obtained it. The reason for that is that second and third line have lower probabilities of appearing, so if you already have a tier 10 and above line that is a primary line for that Nikke, you want to lock that and reroll to try to aim for 2 useful lines, or even 3 useful lines in some cases if you get lucky enough, or if you double lock, but that's very expensive. The reasoning for that is to try to aim for 2 primary lines on each piece of overload gear for your core Nikke. So for example, Red Hood, you would want to have attack elemental, if possible, on every single piece of overload gear. Now, the important thing is, don't overcommit to one sole Nikke because you need to build a team. So usually you start by committing into 2 primary damage dealers, a little bit, so that you have at least 1 useful line on everything, maybe 2, and then you start committing into some extra Nikke so that you have 3 teams. That is important because it will allow you to clear solo raid more easily, and it will allow you to clear union raid as well more easily. When it comes to overloading supports, you will see, for example, on my account when I'm streaming, you will notice that many of my supports are fully overloaded. That's because I already have my primary core damage dealers overloaded, and also because I push hard campaign. It is quite important for supports to be overloaded once you're done with your primary damage dealers, because of what we call combat power padding. You will gain extra stats, extra combat power, and make certain walls a little bit less formidable as a result due to how the combat power gap deficit works, and it is especially more relevant ever since they reworked how overload lines now contribute to the combat power of your team. So, let's talk about doles. Doles are the latest addition to the gearing process in Nikke, and they are complicated to say the least. It's very easy to mismanage them, and I will have to talk about a few finer details as well on top of the min-maxing. So here's the spreadsheet. Shout out to Rylegun, and thanks to his research on how this entire hellhole of a min-maxing goes. You can look at it and just absolutely min-max the crap out of it, but I will give you the TLDR. TLDR, you will level up your R dole, which is a blue dole, using blues initially, purples if needed be, to get it all the way to level 15. Once it's at level 15, you will convert it using a SR dole into a SR dole, which will get it to level 5 immediately. As a result, once it's an SR level 5 dole, you will primarily be using gold boxes, because that is the most efficient way. Now, you could be a gambler and use some purple ones to try to gamba and level them up, because at the end of the day, boxes are a very scarce resource, and it's very difficult to level. But overall, the min-maxing path, if you want to absolute min-max, is blue doles, use blues, then purples, and then convert into a purple dole, and then use golden boxes on the purple dole to get it to level 15. Now, what I will have to say when it comes to the nuances of this is the fact that you don't precisely want to level up every dole you equip to level 15, and some Nikkes are core in your teams and you will be using them in solo raid and everything. Unless you're a very large whale that purchases the packs, realistically speaking, you're not going to be able to follow this min-maxing path of going from R to SR all the way to level 15. That's just not realistic, at least from my perspective and my personal experience, because that's what I'm experiencing at the moment. Especially if you want to as well start getting treasures, which is an entirely different kind of worm. So my recommendation is core primary damage dealers such as Scarlet Black Shadow, Alice, the ones that are going to carry your campaign, and the ones that are going to carry your damage in solo raid and union raid. Those you do the R to SR to level 15 path. A lot of the other Nikkes such as Crown, some lesser strong but that you still use primary damage dealers such as Summer Sakura and the like. What you can do is, what I'm personally doing, is equip a SR dole directly. It's far less efficient, but I'm not going to be leveling those damn doles anytime soon anyways, so I might as well get the benefit of the sheer stats that an SR level 0 dole gives them, and just level up everything else in the meantime that is actually of primary importance, only to deal with those later while still benefiting from them. So let us talk about a bit of a nuanced and a bit complicated topic when it comes to min-maxing, and that is DNA labels. DNA labels, you obtain them when you're rolling the gacha and get dupe Nikkes, and they can be spent in the Dole shop. Now, you can buy either badges or you could buy SSR molds. The topic of badges versus SSR molds is like this. If you're before the 160 wall, it's an absolute no-brainer, you should go for SSR molds. If you are missing key Nikkes, you should also go for SSR molds. Now, once you're past that stage and you're a veteran player, it is better to go for the badges rather than the SSR molds due to the expected value out of the molds when it comes to damage increase and stat increases. However, it is such a marginal increase one versus the other that it's essentially a margin of error. It's minimal. For solo raid, for example, you would need 100 pilgrim levels to get a 2% stat increase across all of your pilgrims, which would be the equivalent of getting a limit break on all of your pilgrims in terms of stats. That is 100 levels, that's a lot. Now, if you're going for co-op, however, and I spoke about that with Mr. Konto, shout out to him for giving me that info, you would get a significantly bigger increase, and that is because you're squished down to sync level 200, I believe. You would get something in the ballpark of 8%, maybe 9% stat increase or damage increase versus not having those 100 extra levels on Pilgrim. Now, honestly, it's such a marginal difference that if you're more of a collector at heart, you can perfectly go for SSR molds and try to fish for extra lobbies. If you want to go like absolutely hardcore min-maxing, you can go for the badges. If you don't want to do either and just save them up, you could do that, and honestly, it would make a very, very marginal difference. Now, here come two parts of the video that I initially considered not really talking about, but let's just go through with it. So the priority list when it comes to blue tickets for newer players specifically, and even for veteran players to some extent, is as such. Elysian, you want the Killer Wife, Marciana, Maid Privity, Helm, and regular Privity, with Guillotine being another good option specifically for Elysian Tower. Merciless, you would want Nagatia. Leader, Maxwell Ein, with Jackal being also a good option for PvP. Tetra, you would want Blanc, Noir, Alice, Volume, and Bunny Soda, with Dola being another good option. And do keep in mind that there are what I call codependent Nikkes, meaning that Naga and Tia usually need to pair together to some extent to be effective, and Blanc and Noir need to be paired together. Specifically, Blanc is bordering unusable if she's not paired with Noir, because there are no other members of her squad at the moment. And secondly, this is the part where I would be talking about the Spender's Guide. I would share to you what is the most worthwhile to buy and what is the best things using spreadsheets that have been shared to me by Omni and by other people, and tell you what is optimal in terms of purchases and everything. But I'm gonna be real with you, I don't want to needlessly encourage spending, so I will just say the most worthwhile purchase that you can make are the campaign packs of gems, the daily gems, and just pools for your favorite Nikkes. Everything else is so much whale territory that is completely unnecessary and that will just cost you for nothing. Now, if you're a new player and you're thinking that you're going to spend to quote-unquote catch up to veteran players that have been playing since day one, and especially the whale ones, you gotta view it like this. You're essentially trying to sprint to catch up to people that have been running a marathon with an hour and a half ahead of you. The amount of effort and especially money that would take to catch up to them in such a short amount of time would be basically selling your liver, and I personally don't think it's super worthwhile. If you want to do it, make sure that you can afford it, but you know, I would say honestly just stick to role packs to get your favorite Nikkes, slowly build up, and top 3% of solo raid is completely achievable free to play. Even if you're a newer player, you will eventually build towards it and you'll be able to do it pretty easily. Nikkes are completely usable and at full potential at limit break 0, meaning the first copy you get, the Nikke is completely usable out of the box. Once you're past the 160 wall, the value of dupes is only for competitive players, and even then, you can get top 3% of solo raid. You can be in a pretty decent union And you can even be, in some cases, like in very, very high unions, without having to, spend a lot of money and everything. Just build up and just slowly get there. But yeah, that's the entire shop thing. It adds up so quickly that I cannot in good consciousness recommend a spender's guide to you guys. And that concludes the resource management guide. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop by on Twitch. I stream Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, 8 p.m. to midnight CEST. And with that, catch you guys on the next video.